Stop trying to fix your culture and do this instead. If we haven't met yet, my name is Tim Ohai, and I work with a ton of companies, both as coach and consultant, and I am telling you, I am exhausted with hearing stories about toxic corporate cultures. Now, not every culture is horrible, but my experience is there are very few cultures that are actually living up to the expectations that the employees have. Why is this? Let me tell you. It all starts with the idea that people don't really understand what a company culture is. Most people think the company culture is the beliefs and values of the organization, that it's some sort of magical fabric that touches every part of every decision and every role. That's not true at all. Culture is not a what, it's a how. More specifically, it's the how that is produced when interactions collide. And it's really limited to the people we're actually working with. So I want to give you 3 tests to define how your culture really works, and then give you advice on what to do about it. Test number 1, how do your small interactions work? Look, people want to say culture covers the entire organization. I don't believe that. I think the reality is that culture is limited to the groups of people that we actually work with, because culture is produced by interactions, right? So if I work in a company that has operations in Germany, but I never work with the Germans, you can't tell me we have a shared culture. But let's break it down to something even smaller, more local. If I work in marketing and I never work with the people in finance, can you imagine what it's like when we meet for the first time to try and solve a problem? We're not the same. This is your test. How do small interactions work? How do small groups of people interact? What happens when they don't agree? What happens when they are having to share resources? What happens when they have to share budget? Is there a common set of beliefs and values then, or does it become something that's not healthy? The second big test I want you to use to determine what your culture is really about is to look at how executive interactions work. We want to look at how frontline players interact with executives and vice versa, because if executives aren't talking to the front lines, that tells you something. But you also want to look at how executives interact with each other. When your COO does not get along with your CFO, you've got problems. One group will actually be working to dominate the decisions of another. I've worked for a couple of different companies that had to go through this dynamic. It was often one group that was part of the founding original staff, and the other group was dominated by leaders who'd been brought in from outside the organization. The clash was pretty monumental in each of the examples I'm thinking of. One case in particular, there was literally an open turf war between the original employees and the ones who had come in from a major competitor. And you can guess it wasn't pretty. While public meetings were designed to look happy and harmonious, I knew for a fact from people who were in those meetings that they were contentious as hell. And eventually, the leader of one group was pushed out, and all of the leaders that were part of his team were gone as well. But the third test is the most powerful. Let's assume that small interactions are cool and that executive interactions seem to be acceptable. How do people react when the pressure is turned up? How do people respond under stress? How do leaders react when they hear bad news? And how do people respond to the word failure? That is your real culture. That is what your company is truly about. When things become uncomfortable in order to deliver an outcome, how do people change? What do they shift to become? That is your true culture. What do? Well, let's start with, you cannot fix this entire culture in one shot. It's way too squishy and way too large. Start small. Start with your team and your interactions. Make sure that you're promoting exactly what you want in terms of behaviors and values for small interactions, and drive that as much as you possibly can. Reward when people do the right thing for the right reasons. Recognize people, and most effectively, give greater decision-making authority to the people who are doing it the right way. This opens the door to how you interact with executives. Make sure that you, as an executive leader, are empowering people to make great decisions as long as they're doing it in the way that you want them to do it. And if you're working with executives, do what you can to give them confidence that you can handle the responsibility of making a great decision in your small world in a way that reflects the culture that they are trying to invest in. And thirdly, push to talk about how you respond during stress. Put it on the table. Make the uncomfortable comfortable. It's okay to talk about failure. In fact, let's slow down and talk about what we can learn from it. It's okay to make mistakes. In fact, let's use this as a teaching lesson so that you don't do it again. And most importantly, let's talk about how we want to act before the stress happens. Sit down with your team and sit down with your executives and ask, when the pressure rises, how should we respond? Get those commitments in place first so that when stress happens, the culture that comes out is the one you're hoping for. Holo mua, onward and upward.